Hey everybody, today's a video on my new series where we do overviews of the XR series mixers. We're going to look specifically at the XR Edit software and talk about everything in specific tabs so that you know what you're looking at any given time. And we're going to start doing that right now. Let's go! Okay, so today we are only looking at the Input tab. I'm going to go over what all of these items are here so you know what you're looking at any given time. And I want to point out right away that all of these settings are channel specific. So if I have channel 1 highlighted and I make changes here and then jump to channel 2, things are going to be different, and that will carry across the whole console here. So these are channel specific settings. They are not settings for the entire console. Each thing we manipulate here is for the channel that we have selected. So with that, let's jump right in. So just like the previous tab, we have the channel label here, so we can type in whatever we want and hit enter, or we can use the drop down and choose a name that is already predefined if that's easier for us. And then of course we can also make a color change. So let's make this green outline on black. So the next thing we have right here is the meter for the channel. I have a condenser mic, so I'm going to click on phantom power so that you can see some signal here. So this meter is only to show you the amount of signal that is coming in on the physical input. It is just a representation of the gain on your channel. So if I actually move this gain down, you see this drops. If I move this gain up, you see it increases. This fader here has no effect on this meter. This is purely a representation of the gain, so the sensitivity of your physical input. Then of course that brings us to the phantom power tab. If you have a condenser microphone connected like I do, you will need to turn on phantom power to power that microphone. If you only have a regular dynamic microphone, then you do not need phantom power. You can leave that off. The next thing you see here is the polarity switch. Or phase flip as people call it. If you need to flip your phase or polarity, that's what that's for. Stereo link. I'm going to lift this up because I want you to see stuff happen in real time. I'm going to turn some stuff on. I'm going to raise the gain. Turn on the low cut. If I hit stereo link, this is going to create a stereo pair. It's going to automatically make this channel, which is my first input, the left side of a stereo pair, and it will immediately grab the next channel, which is 2, and make it the right side. I'm going to do that now. Boom. You can see that it inherited the color scheme. If I click on it, it inherited the polarity, the phantom power, the gain settings, and the low cut. So it grabs most of the settings of the channel that it is being linked to. Let's just turn that off. Pull that down, and I'm going to turn some of this stuff off. So the next thing we have is the actual channel source. So I'm connected to an XR18 right now, and we'll go through that first. But if you're connected to a 12 or a 16, this is going to look just a little bit different for you. But let's go down here first. So AD, this is the physical input. This is your analog to digital converter for the physical input of the channel. You now have the input selector. Right now we have 2 select, but I'm going to jump back to 1, and you can see that it is selected for channel physical input 1. I can change this. So I can use this first channel strip to control any physical input that I want. I could change this to 16. I could change it to 18, do whatever I want. As long as this A to D is turned on, this is what determines the input that I'm using. Now, if you were looking at a 16 or a 12, in fact, let's just connect to the 16 right now. So it looks a little bit different. It doesn't give you the analog to digital because that's all you have. And we'll cover why that is in just a second. You can still change the source, but you do not have an analog to digital button because analog to digital is the only place you can pull signal from for these channel strips. Let's jump back to the 18. Oops. Okay, and so this brings us to the next column, and this is why there's a difference between the 12, the 16, and the 18. I'm connected to an 18, which means I also have the ability to send all the signals from the mixer to my computer to use with like Logic or Reaper or Pro Tools or whatever I want to use, and I have the ability to send signal from my computer back to the mixer. If I wanted to do that, I need to tell the mixer where to look to find that signal. And this is where this button comes in. If I switch this from analog to digital over to USB, this channel strip is now looking for signal on the USB cable. And I can tell it which channel to look on. The same way I can choose my source for the analog input, I can choose the USB return that I want signal to be pulled from. And again, let's connect to the 16. That does not exist because it's not an option on the 12 and the 16, only on the 18. Let's go back to the 18. And then, of course, here we have these two faders, and this first fader is for the gain of your analog to digital. If I bring it up, more gain, bring it down, less gain, and the same is true if I was connected to the USB. It's trim. So this is a volume adjustment for the USB signal coming from the computer into the mixer. The next thing we have is low cut. This is part of the EQ tab, and we'll look at that in a second, but you have the ability to turn the low cut on and off from the input tab, and you have the ability to modify what frequency that low cut pulls up to. Just so you can see what we're referencing here, I'm going to keep this completely down and I'm going to turn this off. So remember that that's off and that's down. Let's look at the EQ tab now. Here's the same button for the low cut. If I turn it on, go back to input, you can see it's now on. Go back to EQ. This right here, this circle represents the low cut, also called the high pass. So if I drag this over, you'll remember the fader was all the way down on the input tab, but let's just look, we're at 271 hertz here. Go back to the input tab, and now this fader is up and it's at 271 hertz. So this is just a quick way while you're in the input tab to turn the low cut on and off and modify where that low cut pulls up to on the EQ tab. The next thing we have is the channel insert. If you want to use an effect like a compressor or a gate or an exciter or an EQ right in your original channel signal, you can do that. You would click this to turn it on, then you would choose the effect slot. Each effect is stereo, so you have an A and a B slot for each one. So if I choose effects 1A, it's going to ask if I want to switch it to insert mode, insert on. And so now this is sending signal to the effect unit, and then it's coming immediately back to this point in our signal chain. So we have inserted that effect directly into the signal chain instead of what we would do for something like a reverb or a delay, which is select our effect unit, send signal, and then have that signal come back on the corresponding return fader. That's not what we're doing here. We are inserting it into the original signal chain. Once you've done this, you can have a look over here at the effect, and here's what we have referenced. It turned the insert on because that window popped up and asked us if we wanted to do that. If it hadn't, you would see that this has disappeared, but if we look back at the input, that button is still active. So if you've been turning things on and off, you need to make sure that even though this is on, you come over to the effect and make sure that this insert button is on. If that's not on, you haven't actually properly inserted it. And you'll notice there's another side here. So if I was doing a stereo pair on a stereo effect, I could go here and change this to channel 2. And now the effect is inserted, ready to go for 2, but I have to activate it. And now channel 1 is going to the left side of the effect, and channel 2 is going to the right side of the effect. And this shows us what this is. This happens to be reverb, which again, not likely what we would use. Time-based effects are generally reserved for sending the other way. If you're going to insert it, it's probably going to be an EQ or a compressor or something like that, something that is not time-based. Okay, let's close this and we'll come back to the input tab. And so that's the general idea of this stuff here. All of this is specific to the channel you're looking at. And then the last thing we have to look at in this part of the window is this meter here. This meter is not the same as this meter. Like I said, this meter over here is for the physical input to show you how much level is coming in on the physical input. This meter here is how much signal you are sending to your main left and right bus. So let's switch this back from USB to AD, and you can see I've got signal here. You can see there's signal over here as well, but that's because I have this fader up. If I bring this down, I'm no longer sending anything to the main left-right bus, and you can see that this meter has disappeared. So in this window, you get a really quick reference as to how much signal you are pulling in at the physical input, and then you can also have a quick representation of how much of this signal you are sending out to the main left-right bus. So everything I just talked about is exactly the same for all of the normal channel strips. It changes slightly when we get over to the aux and the effects strips, so let's look at that now. Let's start with the aux. And again, this looks a little bit different if you're connected to the 12 and the 16, which we'll look at in a second. But the aux strip on the XR18 allows you to use the two physical 1/4 inch inputs on the front of the mixer, which are 17 and 18. They are tied together as a stereo pair. So this fader is a stereo pair. You don't have to link it with anything like you do with the normal channel strips. So this is your gain on the analog to digital, which is the 17, 18 1/4 inch ins, but you can also use this channel strip to bring back signal from your computer. Switch that to USB, and now you can assign a stereo return instead of an individual mono return. Anything from 1 to 2 up to 17 and 18, and then of course you have trim here just like you have gain for the AD. Now let's quickly look at the 16. Open this back up. Let's connect to the 16, and you'll see that we have absolutely nothing. And the reason we have nothing is because on the 12 and the 16, this channel strip has one purpose, and that purpose is to play tracks back from the USB recorder. There's a USB slot on the front that you can put a thumb drive into, and you can play tracks from that thumb drive. You can also record to it, but if you are playing tracks back from it, the audio from that will pop up on that fader. So let's just play something really quick. And in a second, there you go. You can see signals playing, and here it is on the aux track. So if I bring this up, that aux track is now playing out to the main left right. But again, nothing visible in this input tab for the aux or for the effects, because they have a very specific purpose in the XR12 and the XR16. Let's really quickly go back to the 18. So we've looked at the aux, and you can see you also have a meter over here, the same as we did on the normal channel strips. So if I had signal coming through the aux and I raised that up, it would tell us how much is going to our main left right from the aux channel strip. Let's look at the effects really quickly. The effects have a channel source, and it's only got one option in here, USB, because by default, these strips are set to pull signal back from the effects that are in the slot that corresponds. So effects 1 send here comes back on effects 1 return, effects 2 send back on effects 2 return. So that's the default value of these. But in the XR18, you can also turn these into stereo returns from your computer. So if I click on this, you can see I've now lost the little bit of signal that was there. And that signal was coming from the first channel going into the first effects slot. But now this is set as a USB return from their computer. Again, because these are stereo faders, just like the aux, you don't have to link them with anything. They allow for a stereo signal. So you can bring back stereo channels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 17, 18. And because there's 4 of these, if you're not using these for your effects, you can actually bring back 4 separate stereo returns from your computer. So let's say you had all 18 channels on the XR18 sending something to your DAW like Logic, Reaper, Pro Tools, whatever. And you weren't using your effects because you're just sending stuff straight to the computer, but you wanted to bring back 4 separate stereo mixes to send to different places, like one to your main left right, a couple to your buses. you can absolutely do that by designating them as USB returns. And of course, the last thing to look at is we have a meter here, just like we do for every other channel strip, and that shows us the amount of signal for these channel strips that are going out to the main left right. So there you go. Now you know what you're looking at any given time when you have the input tab of your XR mixer open. I hope this was interesting, entertaining, educational, and if it was any of those three things, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. You can also check us out on Patreon, or you can join the channel down below, or you can even do a super thanks down below if anything we do on this channel is useful to you. For everybody who's already done all of those things, thank you so much. It helps more than you realize. And until we see you next time, thanks for watching here on Quickies. Bye, everybody.